I want to say good morning to everyone, and just a friendly reminder that this session is recorded. So I wanted to welcome everyone to our workshop on Let's Indigenize the City with IPD Philly, also known as Indigenous Peoples Day Philly, Inc. I want to thank you all again for being here and diving into the work that's being done across the city to advance equity for students in the School District of Philadelphia and move forward to a space of peace, hope, and healing. So for this workshop, we'll have Mabel Negrete and Manny Vasquez and Griffin Quinn from Indigenous Peoples Day Philly, who will be leading us through a workshop that focuses on Indigenous histories, presence, issues in the city of Philadelphia and the United States. So with us, we have Mabel Negrete, who is a native Chilean of the Pichigi Inca heritage, executive director and co-founder of IPD Philly. Mabel is also an artist, an activist, educator, and entrepreneur. So thank you so much, Mabel, for being here. We also have Manny Vasquez. Manny was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, to immigrant parents of Indigenous Octane descent. He now serves as the campaign event volunteer coordinator of Indigenous Peoples Day Philly, Inc. And we also have Griffin Quinn of Alaskan Native descent. Griffin serves in communications, social media, and marketing for IPD Philly. Griffin is not joining us today as a facilitator, but we definitely want to acknowledge that the work was instrumental in development of the workshop. So with that, I will turn everything over to Mabel.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Mari Compuche, and just a little correction is Spicunche, Inca, of heritage from the Chilean territory, which is also shared by Chile and Argentina, which is Mapu. Anyways, so I'm going to pass it on this presentation now to Manny Vasquez, and we're going to first set up our slideshow to make sure all is working. And let me just give me a second.
Hello. Hola, buenos dias. Happy New Year, happy lunes, happy Monday. Also, minor correction is Oaxacan descent. It is a pleasure to meet everybody here and for have all of you join us today. So while Mabel gets our PowerPoint set up and going, beautiful. Amazing. So while we're getting that going, I'm honored for all of you to join us today for our Let's Indigenize the City workshop. This workshop is part of IPD Philly's program for coalition building workshop series that aim to confront and challenge settler-colonial violence against Indigenous peoples of America, and instead to help build a narrative that celebrates the wealth of Indigenous cultures, histories, knowledge, and politics. So we thank you for being here and taking the time to learn with us about Indigenous Americans. So if we go to slide number 3, our agenda is going to overview a couple of things. So quick welcome before we move on into a line acknowledgement, a group activity, and then we're finally going to close off with some closing remarks. We have a few house rules that we want to briefly go over. Very basic, so please no disturbances. Please silence cell phones or turn off your mics during the duration of the call. Take space and make space for those who have not shared or who are looking to share. Our chat is going to be always open throughout the workshop. Number 3, ask questions. Your participation is really valuable to everyone here. And number 4, finally, use the reactions in the bar below. So we are going to ask everyone to please fill out a sign-in form that I'm going to send out in the group chat right now. So if you follow the link, completing this form will be key to the note-taking portion of the workshop and so that we can email you with our resources later on. So following that, we're going to ask everyone to also please introduce yourselves in the chat. So by sharing out your name, preferred pronouns, profession, if it applies, if there's any tribal affiliation, if you want to speak on your ethnicity or nationality, and the organization you represent, just so we have a read on who's in the space and who's in the room. And we'll go into a land acknowledgement while you guys introduce yourselves in the chat. So at this point, we would like to open the space with a land acknowledgement and then go over the workshop itself. So Indigenous Peoples Day would like to acknowledge that the land on which we live and labor was stolen from the Lenni-Lenape peoples and their descendants. Some survived and remained in their homelands of Lenapehoking, while others were forcefully removed as far as Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Canada, and have lived in the diaspora since. The Lenape peoples are still marginalized today, even in the city of brotherly love. So we're here today to put in the work towards undoing the effects of colonialism on indigenous populations, as we are an indigenous land, which is rightfully Lenape. And now we have some guiding question activities. So these questions are about to be sent out in the chat as well, but we have a few that we're going to ask folks to pick. So please select one or two as you see them on our slide. So is there a particular subject in the presentation that you didn't know or wish to learn more about? Or is there any subject in the presentation that connects with your work? So if there are any questions listed in the workshop presentation or in the chat below that really call to you, please make sure you take note of them. Our aim with these questions is for you to have an opportunity to focus on some of the important topics and ideas that we are introducing to you today. So we're going to return back to these during our breakout room activity. We'll get a chance to take some notes and also share out. So questions have been sent in the chat. Please read through them and select one that calls to you or speaks to you personally. And we'll be using that in the breakout room activity a little later on. So that being said, now we'll move on to our presentation by Griffin Quinn, who helped with the research and created this video. So Mabel, without further ado.
Hello everyone, my name is Griffin and I'll be presenting for IPD Philly today. Here we have a brief overview of our presentation. We don't have time to get into each subject, so we'll be skipping over some slides unfortunately, but the full presentation will be available to you via our one-stop doc. And at any rate, we have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. Indigenous, Native American, and First Nations peoples are as diverse as the lands we are from. The people in this collage represent nations from all over the continent, from Nunavut, Canada to Tierra del Fuego. Many Indigenous peoples today are mixed race due to diaspora, genocide, and forced assimilation over the centuries. This is an incredible resource for learning about what our continent looks like beyond colonial borders. This is an ongoing project by Tribal Nations Maps, and schools, libraries, and other institutions are welcome to purchase from their collection. Food is very important to many Indigenous peoples, and while different foods hold significance in different places, potatoes and corn have become staple foods at this point for the entire world. And the history of the potato begins roughly 8,000 years ago, give or take a millennium or two. The ancestors who lived around Lake Titicaca in the Andes mountain range began to domesticate and cultivate the potato, which grew in abundance. There are over 4,000 varieties of potato that stem from these early cultivators, and many Quechua farmers have traditions which dictate the varieties that they grow. Corn is a descendant of a wild grass called teosinte and was domesticated in central Mexico roughly 9,000 years ago. Over thousands of years, corn was slowly traded north through the continent. It was grown by the Pueblo people around 4,000 years ago, and archaeologists have dated the presence of corn in the northeastern U.S. to over 2,000 years ago. So be sure to think of these origins when considering the history of the Americas, and that corn didn't just pop up across the continent, it was traded and taught to grow by skilled cultivators. Another often overlooked aspect of Indigenous and Native American history is what we're taught about the first invasions in the Americas. The next 3 slides are maps which show the initial routes of contact over a couple of centuries. As you can see on this slide, Columbus first invaded the Taino peoples in the Caribbean in 1492. Over the course of the next 100 years, the Spanish sent multiple invaders throughout Central America in what is now known as the Gulf of Mexico. As a result of colonization, many nations had to incorporate into other communities during the process in order to survive. And these invasions also give insight into the movement of people across the globe through enslavement. Another overlooked aspect of early colonization is the prevalence of Indian enslavement. The East Coast was heavily impacted by Indian slavery, and many relatives along the coast were trafficked as far away as the Caribbean to work in gold mines in the now called Dominican Republic. The long-term impacts of Indian slavery can be seen in how many peoples are in the diaspora today, disconnected from their roots. The same tactics of separation and torture were also seen in the boarding school system across the Americas that served to steal children from their communities and assimilate them into Western culture. And these are just a couple more maps that we won't go into that show the progress of land grabs throughout the centuries. In addition to the invasions, it's also important to know about the resistances of Indigenous and Native American peoples. We've chosen only a few to highlight here, and we won't be able to go into all of them, but there are hundreds that are equally worth knowing about over the course of the last 500 years of resistance. The American Indian Movement was founded in July 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota by Dennis Banks, Clyde and Vernon Belcourt, and George Mitchell, all of whom are Ojibwe. The movement was initially founded in response to police brutality and racial profiling in urban areas, but it grew to be the main driving entity of the Native American civil rights movement through the 70s. Some of their notable actions include the occupation of Alcatraz Island, the occupation of Mount Rushmore, and the occupation of Wounded Knee. In 1970, the United American Indians of New England declared U.S. Thanksgiving Day a national day of mourning, and it is still commemorated every year to this day. The occupation of Wounded Knee, South Dakota by the Oglala Lakota and American Indian Movement followers was a pivotal moment in Indigenous resistance. They did so in protest of the United States' failure to honor the treaties with Native Americans. The occupation drew national attention and shed light on the realities of being Native American in the U.S. that were previously unknown by most non-Native people. And this is one of the slides we're skipping over. The International Indian Treaty Council is an organization that fights for the rights of Indigenous peoples at the United Nations. They have a lot of history and information on how to advocate for the rights of Indigenous peoples, and they're pioneers for the movements of Indigenous peoples worldwide. The Indigenous movement started here in the Americas. This is another one we're skipping over. Indigenous Peoples Day started in 1992 in Berkeley, California, which was the 500-year anniversary of Columbus's first voyage. IPD Philly began in 2017 when we noticed that the Lenape were not being recognized as the original peoples of this land. Indigenous Peoples Day is a date of resistance. It's also a celebration of the diversity of our cultures and a collective experience in survival and the resilience of our ancestors and of us. And these are just some additional slides showing the growth of Indigenous Peoples Day. And you can watch Indigenous Peoples Day Philly 2022 on our website. The Zapatistas are highly influential in the Native community and Indigenous history. They formed in a contested space between the nation-state of Mexico and the Indigenous community. They are an example of the generations-long fight to preserve traditions and knowledge. And this is another one we're skipping over. The movement at Standing Rock was the catalyst for Indigenous Peoples Day Philly to start in 2017. The visibility of resistance and the experience many of us had going out there ourselves was inspiring and made us want to reach out to communities in our own area, not just to socialize, but also to learn and know about local history and to preserve that knowledge. And we realized there was a lot of unknowns about the Lenape people. This is another link for you to get acquainted with the Permanent Forum at the United Nations, which was formed in the year 2000 to deal with Indigenous issues related to economic and social development, culture, the environment, education, health, and human rights. This UNESCO call for an International Year of Indigenous Languages in 2019 was a worldwide effort to restore and preserve Indigenous languages. Remember to pay attention to the languages of the area that you're in, and if you're Indigenous to other parts of the world, consider what languages the ancestors of your territory spoke too. What does the term First Nations mean? Before European contact, there were many intricate societies throughout the Americas, including empires and confederations of tribes. Here, we have 3 sophisticated tribal relations that are identified by geography and linguistics to this day. The original territory of the Taino peoples encompasses many Caribbean islands which still have their original indigenous names, including Kalinago, Boriken, and Bimini. The Aztec territory was very large. They were a conglomeration of many different communities, each of which had their own distinct language and identities. Lenapehoking, the ancestral territory of the Lenape people or Delaware Nation, encompasses 3 linguistic territories as shown on this map. Since the mid-1700s, the Lenape or Delaware Nation were forcefully removed from their homelands. Today, they are comprised of 5 federally recognized interrelated communities. Here's a list of the nations in the US and Canada, complete with the links to the official websites for the tribes. And here's a couple more resources for learning about the history of Native peoples in the Americas. Hundreds of years of colonialism has resulted in different forms of ongoing trauma for Indigenous peoples. Here we will briefly cover a few key topics, and again, we won't be able to go into each one, but you'll have access to these resources and additional information, again, in the one-stop doc. We'll briefly touch on the history of land loss, forced assimilation, and important Indian laws here. The Indian Removal Act was signed into law by President Andrew Jackson on May 28, 1830. When the law passed, it gave the United States the green light to formally and legally remove tribal communities under Western law, and losing Indian lands resulted in a loss of cultural identity. This policy paved the way for Indian boarding schools to be streamlined in the U.S. The General Allotment Act, also known as the Dawes Act, was enacted on February 8, 1887, and this is an assimilation policy. The purpose of this act was to break up the tribe's legal rights by granting allotment to individuals who were tribal members rather than the tribe as a whole. Land that was unclaimed by the guidance of the Dawes Act was then sold, and proceeds were used to create more Indian boarding schools. The Indian Citizenship Act, also known as the Snyder Act, was enacted on June 2, 1924. It admitted Native Americans born in the U.S. to full U.S. citizenship, but even with the passing of this bill, the Constitution left it up to the states to decide who had the right to vote, so it still took over 40 years for all 50 states to allow Native Americans the right to vote. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act was enacted on August 11, 1978. The purpose of this act was to grant American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian peoples the right to believe, express, and exercise their traditions and ceremonies. The Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted on November 8, 1978, and the purpose is to establish minimum federal standards for the removal of Native American children from their homes so that they're placed in homes that reflect the unique values of Indian culture, aka being placed in Native homes first, if they're put up for adoption. This is another act that we're going to be skipping over. And today, there are currently 574 federally recognized tribes in the U.S., but did you know that there's a difference between being state recognized and federally recognized? And you can learn more about that by following the links on this slide. And this is one of the sections that we'll be skipping over. The information is there for you, though, of course. MMIW stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. There is an epidemic across the continent of Indigenous women disappearing with no explanation and no answers. And these are just more images and statistics related to that. The appropriation of our arts, cultures, and identities is an ongoing issue. The Not Your Mascot movement is a movement to eliminate the misrepresentation of Native and Indigenous imagery in sports mascotry. And this is a prevalent issue in Pennsylvania. There's currently over 60 schools that have yet to change their mascot, and that's a 6-0. A present topic today is on Indigenous versus mixed-race Native identities. Nativeness is used as a term to connect an individual's connections to a specified place by virtue of birth or origin. Indigenous peoples means the original inhabitants of a certain region in contrast to another group who has settled or colonized the region. It's important for institutions to be aware of how mixed-race people have been dispossessed since colonial times. It's a legacy of a highly racialized society that had specific intentions to separate the original peoples from their communities, identities, and land. It's important to be aware of and sensitive to this legacy and its long-lasting impacts. And this is just a quick quote about it. And of course, for more key terms and other information, you can access our one-stop doc for more. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone.
So hopefully this introductory video gave everyone a deeper insight into the histories of Indigenous existence in the Americas. In this page, you will find the link to download the PDF version of the video and the script, which will be made accessible after this presentation. Also, you can find them in the one-stop doc that we are sharing right now in the chat. In that document, you will find all the resources that are mentioned and used in this workshop, as well as some additional ones, including some book reading recommendations, other resources, articles, and so on. So now we will be going to breakout rooms. So the link for the breakout room group activity doc is also being shared out right now in the chat. Doki. Okay, so with that, we are going to take some time to break out into two groups, and we're going to circle back on those questions that we mentioned earlier so we can have a quick share up and review before we finish up our workshop today. Okay. Like we have everybody back. Mabel, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I want to share, and I'm going to share it by my screen on the last slide, is that we have a small survey that we're going to be also be sending it in the email that we're going to be following up after this. Please save the date, October. I think that's the wrong number. October 9th. Monday, October 9th is actually Indigenous Peoples Day this year. Also, please recommend our workshops. And some of you are interested also in helping you to connect to the federal tribes, the Lenape federal tribes. We have direct communication with them, as well as the Native community in the region. It's small, but it's very important that whatever you do work with the with the communities that are mostly impacted. So without further ado, I would just want to say thank you. Thank you also to the funders who have been making this workshop a reality since 2021, and also for Philadelphia district, for inviting us into this amazing opportunity and share with all of you. Thank you, Kyle. I pass it on to you now.
Thank you, Mabel and Manny. We definitely appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. If you have any lingering questions or wonders, please feel free to leave them in the Padlet. Responses will be gathered and shared out in a summit follow-up email. So I'll share that with you all in the chat now. I just have a few quick things before we go. So there's the Padlet for everyone. Just in our final minutes, I just want to take a moment to thank you all for attending. I want to definitely thank our presenters for giving a wonderful presentation. And I'm going to drop 3 things in our chat. So for one, this is the session menu for the presentations later on in the day, thinking about 15 or 30 minutes or so. So I'll drop that in just in case everyone is interested in stopping by. So I have that. And second, we want to share our survey. If this is your only session that you'll be attending, please take a moment, fill out the survey to help us better plan, facilitate learning opportunities. If you are attending a second session, no need to necessarily fill that out now. You'll receive the same survey in your next session. So I will drop that survey in the chat as well. And finally, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Equity Coalition will be hosting a monthly series during the lunch hour, which is called Equity in Practice. So I'll be dropping that flyer into the chat as well. Feel free to stop by if you have the time. All of the presentations will be very similar to the one today. Just sparking really good conversation and sharing good information throughout the district and the city of Philadelphia. So we'll be updating the series, and we're looking to do it monthly. And I'll drop that flyer in for everyone. And I think we are all good to go. Thank you, everyone, for everything, and have a great day.